Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Kylie Minogue, titled Kiss Me Once. You know, as much as I get annoyed by certain artists who don't understand their very narrow range as performers, that's not saying that I find artists who have a limited skill set intolerable. Far from it, actually, and this ties into part of my big love for pop music. If you understand your strengths, you can work on honing that unique skill set into something truly potent and powerful, even if it never really reaches depth or intellectual transcendence. There's an argument to be made for music that knows exactly what it is and works to be the best possible form of it. And that's why I've got a certain amount of tolerance for shallow pop music or shallow dance music. Instead of making some grand, edifying statement or approaching depth that's clearly out of its league, it works on making the best possible example of its genre, and that music can be just as great and just as emotionally effective. So take Kylie Minogue for instance. Her music career began back way in 1987 with her early albums backed by Stock, Aitken, and Waterman, and has tended to stick to one of two veins ever since: the fast-paced dance pop track or the cooing sex kitten love jam. And sure, you're not exactly getting a lot of depth in that sort of Europop in which Kylie Minogue specialized. The deepest thing she's ever done was working with Nick Cave, but you did get a lot of great pop songs whenever that did get some mainstream attention whenever the dance scene got popular on the charts. Thus, it's not exactly surprising that her biggest career successes came in the very late 90s and early 2000s, when slick Europop briefly crossed over onto the mainstream charts and did very well for a short time. And thus, it didn't exactly surprise me to see that Kylie Minogue was releasing a new album this year, given her last album in 2010. After all, given the rise of the festival scene, the EDM, and even the modest disco revival of last year, it makes a certain amount of sense that Kylie Minogue would attempt another return to the spotlight, this time under the management of Jay-Z's label Roc Nation. On the one hand, I was enthusiastic. If she was working with producers close to Jay-Z, Pharrell was going to inevitably be involved, and that tends to be a good thing given both their affinities for disco. On the other hand, the other executive producer besides Minogue on this album is Sia, an artist who only seems to be getting more ephemeral and less tolerable the more she moves towards the mainstream. And Sia has more writing credits on this album than Minogue does. So, with all that in mind, is Kiss Me Once any good? It's alright, I guess. It's by no means Kylie Minogue's worst album, but it's not her best either. If anything, this was the sort of album from Kylie Minogue that I was dreading, because not only is it not just an adaptation or even an appropriation of the better sounds and styles of the modern EDM scene by Kylie, but instead an attempt to crowbar Kylie Minogue's voice into the modern sound. And thus, you don't end up with an album that doesn't play to Kylie's strengths as a vocalist, which to me, that was a real shame. So, okay. Let's first start by talking about the lyrics and themes. I have only one thing to say here. While the lyrics are reasonably well written for pop music, with a highlight for me being If Only and the low points being either Sexercise or Les Sex, the lyrics really don't matter. They never have. There's never really been depth in Kylie Minogue's lyrics at their best, and here we get a collection of lyrics that would have common ground with songs on any other Kylie Minogue album. With only a few exceptions, they never really reach the point of being annoying or obnoxious or offensive, but at the same time, they don't exactly have a lot of flavor in terms of their metaphors either. And it's clear that if we were looking for a spot where there was the absolute least effort in the songwriting process, it would be here. No, what gets a lot more interesting on this album is the instrumentation and the production. Now, Kylie Minogue has a reputation for continuously involving her sound to fit with the times, but at her best, there was a sort of loose, disco-inspired, free-flowing energy that made her songs a lot of fun to dance to and enjoy. Now, given the modern trends of pop, I was anticipating some of that energy to crop up more on this album, and it didn't really happen. Instead, a lot of the production seems inspired by the more opulent and grandiose touches that people in Jay-Z's camp tend to favor, along with heavier, fuzz-saturated electronica for the dance breakdowns. And while I don't think the blend of classical instrumentation always works with the electronic elements, it really does sound a lot more cohesive here and doesn't really suffer from a lot of the bloat that you found on, say, Jay-Z's album or from Beyonce. And honestly, you're working with some of the best producers in the business here. I'm not surprised it sounds as good as it does. But here's the problem. Kylie Minogue's brand of breathy, high-pitched vocals really aren't the sort that you'd want to pair with this style of production. It's just simply too heavy and booming, and while she's never quite swallowed up by the mix, it never supports her delivery. It never gives her any additional strength or power. One of the reasons the flighty, high-energy sound of the late 90s worked so well for her is that it provided that gentle support for her vocals while still keeping the tightness and energy. Here, we get some of the energy. We get rather stiff production, but it only inconsistently supports her vocals on songs like the funky Sexy Love or the low-key Feel So Good. In other cases, it just feels so thudding and slow to really complement her voice well, and that's a real shame. And yet, that's not the only problem with the production. It's not the worst problem either. No, that falls to the vocal effects placed on Kylie Minogue's voice. And, well, look, I'm not normally one to complain about auto-tune or vocoder effects. Sometimes they can be very powerful for influencing and enhancing a song's personality or an artist's personality. Look at Kesha, look at T-Pain. But here, it does the exact opposite. Pulls a Katy Perry or a Jason Derulo and leeches away a lot of Kylie's unique presence, which doesn't help her stand out behind the microphone. Honestly, there are points where a Britney Spears comparison wouldn't be far from the truth, and that's such a damn shame for Kylie because she's always had a lot more charisma and presence to make up for her slightly weaker voice. Sure, there was multi-tracking on previous songs, but it at least supported that sort of breathy sexiness that worked in her vocals. So on a song like Beautiful, a regretful song between two former lovers and a duet with Enrique Iglesias, it ends up losing a lot of that unique vocal flavor because both of them are auto-tuned so heavily. And let's face it, these guys are not Daft Punk. They can't make that robots falling in love shtick really work. So look, in the end, there are some critics who are calling Kiss Me Once by Kylie Minogue her most anonymous album to date. And while I don't entirely agree, mostly because Kylie is still a very solid pop presence and her songs never reach the point of being actively forgettable, it doesn't nearly have the personality or flavor that her older albums have had. And she's had a lot of albums with a lot of unique flavor. If she was looking for songs that would fit into the modern pop landscape, well, she got it, but it doesn't stand out and doesn't remotely play to her strengths as a performer. And while there's a few songs in this album that I did enjoy for just this pure pop dance appeal, there's very little on this record that stuck with me after multiple listens. So, in the end, 5 out of 10 and only recommendation if you're a hardcore Kylie Minogue fan and you're looking for her newest sonic evolution. But even on that standard, I have to say that Kylie Minogue, she could have done a lot better. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums coming up that you'd like me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. So until then, see you next time.